As the daughter of one of South Carolina's first families, Angelina Grimke lived in almost unimaginable luxury. In the 1820s, Charleston's aristocracy was one of the wealthiest societies on earth. But Angelina found it almost unbearable. An empire of sin.
The story goes that each of them in the family had their own personal slave behind them when they ate dinner. And if the salt and pepper were next to the person sitting next to you, you didn't ask them to pass it. Your slave got it from his slave and gave it to you. There was nothing that you had to do, that there wasn't a slave who took care of it for you.
Did you hear last night?
Hear what?
Really?
Angelina, what are you talking about?
You know, Henry, he whipped John again.
I told you before, dear. That's Henry's business.
Angelina attacked slavery, not in the beginning because she cared about the slaves.
It is Henry's business. You know what
She was really concerned about the fate of their white masters.
I ask you to leave him alone.
He's my brother.
Yes, I know.
She believed slavery was a sin and that God would punish people who had slaves.
Mother, it is my duty to bear testimony against...
Angelina, mind your own business.
It is my business, and it's your business too. How can you stand in church every week?
Let it be.
I can't let it be. Have you no Christian feelings?
Yes, Angelina, I have Christian feelings, and you are putting them to the test right now. My soul will be judged by the Lord, and not by you or anyone else.
It is my duty.
It is not your duty, Angelina. I'm glad, I suppose, that you are so diligent about your faith. But leave my soul to me, and Henry's to Henry.
I speak the truth in love.
Enough!
Mother. Mother. Mother, listen to me. Mother!
Angelina's religious search was tortured. She was more or less on her own as she struggled with very deep and troubling issues about herself and her relationship to God.
In the fall of 1829, Grimke resolved to leave Charleston and the pollutions of slavery for an uncertain future in the North.
There's a kind of fearlessness about Angelina Grimke. Women did not strike out, and white women did not strike out on their own in this way, and Southern white women certainly did not. This is disobedience to proper society, to the South, to the church.
In the years since Angelina Grimke left her home in Charleston, she had moved to Philadelphia and joined her like-minded sister Sarah. There, Angelina discreetly followed reports of the abolitionist movement. She was reluctant to get involved, fearing that would bring disgrace to her mother back in Charleston. But as she read reports of the rising tide of pro-slavery violence, Grimke finally decided that she could remain silent no more.
Respected friend, I can hardly express the deep and solemn interest with which I have viewed the violent proceedings of the last few weeks.
The ground upon which you stand is holy ground. Never, never surrender it. It is my deep, solemn, deliberate conviction that this is a cause worth dying for. Angelina Grimke. William. She's the daughter of one of the most famous families in South Carolina.
When Garrison receives Angelina Grimke's letter, he sees a Southern woman who is confirming everything that the abolitionists have been saying about slavery's evils. It's a godsend.
Garrison's publication of the letter horrified Angelina's friends and even her sister Sarah. They pleaded with her to renounce it, but Grimke refused. Instead, she committed herself to the cause. She had a weapon that no other abolitionist could claim, a pedigree among the slaveholding aristocracy. Grimke set about writing an appeal to the women of the South, urging them to work for the downfall of slavery.
I know you do not make the laws, but I also know that you are the wives and mothers, sisters and daughters of those who do. Let the Christian women of the South arise, and salvation is certain.
Grimke's appeal met the same reception as Garrison's pamphlets. In Charleston, copies were publicly burned, and the mayor warned her mother that if Angelina ever dared visit Charleston again, she would be thrown in jail. But Grimke had no intention of returning to the South. She had made up her mind to take up the banner of abolition. A few months earlier, scores of abolitionists had descended on New York for a training session. William Lloyd Garrison came, as did Angelina and Sarah Grimke. Though Garrison gave a rousing speech, Angelina's head was turned by a striking young theologian who ran most of the sessions. Theodore Weld had committed himself totally to the anti-slavery cause, and had even pledged not to marry until the slaves were free.
Angelina thinks he walks on water. She thinks he is the most amazing man, that he is filled with the passion of abolition. He trains them, teaches them, and sends them off to give talks.
I stand before you as a Southerner, exiled from the land of my birth by the sound of the lash and the piteous cry of the slave. I stand before you as a repentant slaveholder. I feel that I owe it to the suffering slave and the deluded master to do all that I can to overturn a system built up upon the bodies of my countrymen and cemented by the blood and sweat and tears of my sisters in bonds.
Of course, since they're women, to speak in front of a mixed, or as they called it, promiscuous audience of men and women was absolutely forbidden. The abolitionists are ardent desirers of respectability for their movement. So when men start to come to her talks, their antennae go up. And when they tell her to stop talking to men, she says, no, I have a right.
The Grimkes quickly found themselves at the center of a storm. Ministers condemned them and warned of the dangers that loomed if women moved away from their assigned sphere. Many abolitionists agreed. As the arguments escalated, Angelina began linking the rights of enslaved people to the rights of women. Garrison stood by the embattled sisters, but Weld did not. Women's rights should not be your preoccupation, he told Angelina, at least not until the slaves are free. Grimke's pain and anger came through in her reply.
Can't you just stand here side by side with us? Can you not see that women could do and would do 100 times more for the slave if she were not shackled?
By the time their 6-month tour finally ended in the fall of 1837, Angelina could go no further. She collapsed with typhoid fever. As she was recovering, Angelina wrote to Theodore saying she hadn't realized how much he disliked her.
And he writes back to her, "You're young and you have too much pride and you're not helping the cause." And then in great big letters, 3 times the size of the rest of the letter, he writes, "I have loved you from the first moment I met you." I'm sure Angelina had the same response I had. I'm reading, "You're terrible, you're prideful, I what?"
My dear, look at you. You're beautiful.
Your letter was indeed a great surprise, my brother, and yet it was no surprise at all. I feel, my Theodore, that we are the 2 halves of one whole, 2 bodies animated by one soul, and that the Lord has given us to each other.
In the spring of 1838, Angelina and Theodore's friends received a wedding invitation adorned with an engraving of a slave in chains. It would be a ceremony unlike any other. The couple improvised their vows, denounced a man's authority over his wife, and to cap it all off, they had a black minister and a white minister lead the congregation in prayer.
And I reject all authority, all government, save the influence which love gives us over each other.
May the sun continue to shine as it now does. And may our Father guide us in love through the rest of our pilgrimage.
Brothers and sisters, Mr. and Mrs. Weld have chosen to solemnize their union, not by the illegitimate authority of state or church, but by your witness.